Yeah, the more power we give to software systems, the more damage they can do. That certainly is the case. But the more awesome they could do. And that's the knife's edge that we all walk along as a human civilization together, hand in hand. Will we flourish or destroy ourselves? Question mark. Folks on Reddit, the good folks on Reddit, demanded that I ask you about the time you broke production. Is this related to Falcor? Did you break production? Is this
I've
fake
broken
news?
production quite a few times. I've broken productions for so many stupid reasons. One time I broke production because I came up in the PHP, and PHP static means static for the lifetime of the PHP, and PHP was the lifetime of every request, right? That's why PHP was so inefficient, was that every request was its own like instance, and therefore static memory was for the lifetime. I guess I never put that together. And so I had some objects that I made static because I was like, oh, I just need this for the lifetime of the request. And lo and behold, those weren't lifetime. A whole bunch of bad data got all over the place. People were showing up saying they were from all these different countries and everything was all wrong because I just, whoopsie daisies, I just made a whole conundrum with that. So that was one time I did it. Another time is I took down, if you were on the homepage on the website waiting for Lady Gaga's video to come out and you were watching the countdown go down, if it reached 0, the billboard would freeze and it wouldn't work. If you refreshed, it would work, but the reveal, the big reveal, I screwed that up and my boss got real upset, and so did other people in Hollywood got upset about that one. That was like a my bad. Sorry, Jeff Wagner again. I remember that one. I remember that one specifically. One time I released a bug where, again, on the billboard, if you pressed add to my list, I accidentally programmed in an infinite loop, and it just, your whole web page would just freeze.
Are some of these bugs difficult to discover until you sort of
That
run
one seems really easy looking back on it.
Infinite loop, yeah.
And we actually, during those days, we had manual QA that are supposed to go through everything. So I didn't feel as bad because my manual QA counterpart also missed it. Like we all missed it, but it was just so simple. You just press that button, boom, it just completely freezes the website.
Polluting the code with sort of global variables that are holding values, as PHP, I think, allows you to do. That's a tricky one to discover because you rely on it, but then there could be somebody else assigns a value to it. It could be
just data races everywhere. And I just didn't understand, like, in my head, static was like, oh, this is for the life. Like, I was just so locked into the PHP world at that time that I just made such a, like, looking back on it, it's so obvious. But during the time, it's hard.
So in general, pushing to production, I talked to Peter Levels about this. Obviously he's operating as mostly a solo developer, but he often on the websites that thousands, not hundreds of thousands of people use, he often ships to production, pushes to production, meaning like just no testing, just like push to fix. What are the pros and cons of that approach in general to you? What do you think?
It's obviously much easier the smaller your organization is. I think no one would argue that sentiment. If it's just you working on a singular project, it is obviously much easier for you to push directly to production because you are the only one working. You know all the ins and outs. And if something were to break, you would discover it. So to me, that makes sense. Like, I think the way he operates is perfect for what he does. You couldn't take what he does and move it to, say, Microsoft or Netflix or Google, because that would obviously, it would just be a disaster just due to the amount of people all pushing to production. And so I personally love that. I think that you have to gauge both the application you're building and its complexity and what you're pushing and how many people are working on it. I think those all go into how you can kind of do that. Because not all applications are created equal either. Like that application I was making with zooming and scrolling where we had all of our own everything, it was a very deep, heavy logic app. And that was regardless of what was happening on the website. Most of the code was library code. And that becomes way harder if you don't have a good test suite and stuff to kind of run before you push it out, because when you squeeze that ball, different things come popping out in different areas, and that's a very harder problem than, say, if you're doing more of like a heavy visual one, because a heavy visual one, you're affecting just this one area's visual stuff and you can test it, and like that's normally the end of it. Whereas, so it depends on like the coupling and everything. So I love his approach, by the way. I have such mad respect for anyone that operates that way, because I think it's a great way. It just is so good because it kind of breaks this notion that tech Twitter has that, oh, well, you have to use all these expensive services. You need to use all these kind of things, because if you don't use all this kind of stuff, if you're not using the latest version of React, if you're not using the latest version of this, you're going to simply, you're simply not going to make it as a startup. It's impossible. And it's just like, no, that's not software. Like, most of software isn't the new stuff. Most of software is old, crappy software that someone has to maintain. And it actually is really, really great and has lots of really hard problems. And if you look at it differently, it's actually fantastic.
For people who don't know, his tech stack in terms of web development is PHP, jQuery, and SQLite.
Yeah, all great stuff. I'm just surprised he still uses jQuery, just given the fact that at this point on the modern web, everything is, you have document query selector and add event listener click, right? It pretty much has everything you already need. It has DOM content load. Like, all the reasons I used jQuery back in the day was adding a click on a button was like hard. You had to deal with IE7, IE8, IE9, right? Like, those are hard differences, whereas now it's just so easy. I'm just surprised it's even that.
I mean, that's definitely a trade-off. I still use the exact same stack, PHP, jQuery, and different flavors of SQL. But the question there is, you keep using jQuery because you can get the job done really fast, and there's no significant performance hit that you detect. So, like, why switch to something else? But it's always probably, as we'll talk about, good to explore and to learn.
Not all tools are great at solving all problems. And so what you think is really, like, the problem is you run into this kind of trade-off, which is you have some tool belt that you're very adept with. You know all the ins and outs. There's no unknowns, but there's no surprises in this. You know what you're building. You know what you're getting into. You will go through and you will be able to solve the problem. But if you ever use a different language or a different experience, you can find that some things are able to represent states way easier, in a way more efficient way. And you can solve problems really efficiently in some versus the other. And so it's like, if you don't take the time to explore as well, you could be missing out on something that makes you twice as good on this one specific problem, like subset. And so I kind of value being able to look at all problems. And so I don't want to get stuck on one thing, though I see why people do, which is for the efficiency's sake.